and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Friday, the 21st of January. Hi, it's Friday. Well, right now, right here in Brisbane, 24 degrees and cloudy, but still looking like a very good day out there. A little bit of a haze out there, but generally they're looking very, very good. Well, what we're going to do, first of all, let's take a very quick look at some of the headlines for today before we go into all the news. And of course, we have our daily India report coming up right after this as well, and all the news there as well. So right now, what's making news is Western Australia backtracks on border reopening, and New South Wales records 25,168 cases, 46 deaths. And there's an infant who has died with COVID-19 in New South Wales. Victoria records 18,187 new COVID-19 cases, infections, and 20 deaths. 20 more people have died with COVID-19 as Victoria recorded a drop in daily cases with 18,167 new infections found overnight. So that's a little bit of a relief there, but right now let's move on and let's go towards New South Wales. So New South Wales records deadliest day on the pandemic with 46 deaths. So a further 46 people have died with COVID-19 overnight, while the Hunter and New England region reported an infant died with the virus last month. Both devastation and support for McGowan's Western Australia border shut out. We will look at that news in a little while as well. So Western Australia Premier Mark McGowan's controversial border opening backflip has been met with a mixed response. Of course, there will always be mixed response. Some people will say it's good, and some people will always oppose anything that's been happening because, people find it very hard to always agree with all the things. So it is going to be a very, very difficult business for a very long time. An industry boss has said that the isolation period for COVID-19 should have been cut from 7 days till 5. Again, to and fro from that. Some people are for that, some people going against that. Supplies for testing kits are critical and in a crucial situation for New South Wales back-to-school plan. Gaining enough antigen tests for New South Wales school will be crucial when the term begins, a health expert has warned. And that is, of course, going to be a real concern. And going to Sunshine Coast, a teen has been killed and another in custody on Sunshine Coast. A teenager is dead and another in custody following an altercation outside a Sunshine Coast home which happened overnight. So these are the news headlines and a little bit more to come as well. And Alcott reveals mid-match curious exchange. Daniel Medvedev faced a hostile crowd and a full array of Nick Kyrgios outbursts and tricks and still remained calm for long enough to reach the third round at the Australian Open. So, in the end, if you remain calm, it does pay a dividend. Well, right now going overseas, China says it warned of US warship in disputed sea. A United States Navy guided missile destroyer has challenged Chinese claims of sovereignty in and around the islands in South China Sea. And of course, moving right on, we look at defeated Raducanu reveals annoying truth regarding US champion Emma Raducanu, says members of her team did not want her to take to the court. And why was that? For her second round clash, due to the blisters on her right hand, even though she had blisters on her hand, she did take to the court while her team didn't want her to go on the court. So, controversial tactic that halted Kyrgios' tidal wave. Reigning US Open champion Daniel Medvedev says his short trip back to the locker room after losing the third set to Nick Kyrgios helped him eventually prevail. So, there has been lots of talks about those trips to the lockers and to the change rooms, sometimes mid-match and other things. People have talked a lot about that. There's been so much commentary happening on that. Twice weekly testing flagged for Victoria's back-to-school plan. Victoria's finalised back-to-school plan is set to be released as early as today. As we know, all the states are gearing up for the back-to-school, which is going to be a little bit challenging. So, are you not entertained? Kyrgios puts on a show against Medvedev. Nick Kyrgios' second round match against Russian superstar Daniil Medvedev was everything fans were expecting from the Australian entertainer. Well, of course, always putting in the best effort and there's sportsmanship out on the court. It will die out, Kyrgios warning to the critics of boisterous fan. Nick Kyrgios says umpires need to do more to control crowd noise between serves at the Australian Open, but admits it's a good sign for the sport that fans are embracing a different energy. So it is wonderful to see that. Now, Tongan Aquaman reveals how he survived 24-hour swim after the tsunami. A Tongan man who swam for 28 hours after getting swept out to the sea during Saturday's devastating tsunami has spoken out about his epic swim. Now that's something to talk about. 28 hours in the sea. And moving on to the US, of course, we know that Biden is also facing a lot of challenges there as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, right now, but once again, let's move on with the news for today, and let's look at what's happening out there. Yes, good morning, Devika, and everyone who is joined in. It is wonderful to have your company right here on Australian Indian Radio's daily Facebook Live update. Well, right here in Queensland, the death numbers are increasing, and so is the number of cases, and of course the hospitalization as well.
The Sunshine State is undergoing a big shift in how it approaches the pandemic.
Omicron is extremely contagious. Not only is the spread of this virus inevitable, it is necessary.
This shift coincides with a change in Chief Health Officer. In December, just as the state's borders reopened, infectious disease specialist John Gerard took over. The change in tone was immediate.
In order for us to go from the pandemic phase to an endemic phase, the virus has to be widespread.
That was really setting the tone for his tenure as Chief Health Officer. I think people appreciate the fact that sort of honest and open candour about how we're going to handle it.
Dr Gerard has pushed back against suggestions further restrictions are needed to slow the spread of Omicron.
I acknowledge this is controversial and others would not agree with this, but we are not going to stop this virus, and a minor change like imposing a density limit of 1 in 2 square metres, I think the evidence suggests that it's not going to have a major impact on the virus, but it would have a major impact on the greater society.
It's a dramatic difference. We've gone from no Queenslander should have to worry about any risk whatsoever to we're all likely to be exposed in some way to COVID.
We're talking 3 or 4 months.
John Gerard replaced Jeanette Young, who stepped down after 15 years in the job to become the state's governor.
I'm not comfortable with any deaths that are preventable.
Her COVID containment strategy was marked by short, sharp lockdowns and tough border closures, resulting in limited outbreaks and few deaths.
Now, look, the approach of elimination, which mainly involved Dr. Jeanette Young, where she did, I think, a really tremendous job, had a completely different set of challenges to where we find ourselves today.
So there was a time for several months towards the end of 2021 where Queenslanders were not allowed to return to Queensland, even if they were doubly vaccinated, even if they had a negative test, and even if they had a home in Queensland where they could self-isolate.
In hindsight, was Jeanette Young too slow to accept more risk and let some of those people in?
No, not at all. The original strategy was a containment strategy to allow people to get vaccinated, and that required very strong infection control measures. We've seen that with the virus, as soon as you just relax a little bit, the virus will spread.
It's important that anyone who lives in that Bingley...
There are questions about whether Dr Young did enough to prepare the public for the radical switch which is now taking place. Her defenders point to comments like this she began making late last year.
We are, all of us, going to end up being infected with COVID. Every single person in Queensland.
We were always going to have to go from zero COVID into living with it at some stage or another, and whether it happened under one chief health officer's watch or another probably is neither here nor there.
Dr Young was scathing about the AstraZeneca vaccine at a time when many Queenslanders weren't fully vaccinated.
I don't want an 18-year-old in Queensland dying from a clotting illness who, if they got COVID, probably wouldn't die.
I think part of the lag of Queensland versus the other states in vaccination are down to those comments. When the Chief Health Officer starts saying that she doesn't want to see people vaccinated for any reason, that's extremely concerning to people.
Anyone who's got any concerns at all and would like to know something about the AstraZeneca vaccine should immediately go and talk to their GP about it.
Do you need to do more to endorse that vaccine though, given that it may be harmful, your comments?
No, I have endorsed it every single day.
Hospital admissions are escalating and deaths are rising in Queensland, with the Omicron peak predicted around the end of January.
We certainly are going to have a rough trot in the next month or so, and our hospitals will be put under strain.
John Gerard's been a really straight shooter up until now, and I hope he can maintain that and not start learning how to avoid questions.
Dr Gerard, there's been a big shift in the health strategy since December, and we're starting to see, unfortunately, some of the hard consequences of that. How do you make sure the public doesn't lose confidence in the strategy you're pursuing now?
It has always been inevitable that the virus would spread through Queensland after the borders were opened and the restrictions were released. What goes a bit beyond what was expected was just the speed with which this virus has spread.
So the point that many people have been making is that if we knew this is going to happen, if at one stage we were going to, open the borders and let the virus spread, why did we even have to lock it in the first place? Soon the whole nation had just been open and deal with the consequences in a national manner. And try and control it nationally rather than each and every state having their own different rules and regulations. And of course, the tremendous work that went into that border control, trying to maintain that border control, the number of people that had to be there, the forms that had to be filled in, and all the things. And of course, there were so many people who were so frustrated with all the things that were happening. Well, right now, let's go once again to US, where US President Joe Biden has sought to clarify his stance on the potential Russian incursion of Ukraine. And of course, there is an inquest into Pope Benedict, whether he knew of the abusive priest when he ran the archdiocese. One lawyer said, "We believe that he can be accused of misconduct in 4 cases. So, these days, no one is exempt, no one is immune. Everyone's eyes is on everyone. So we always just really need to do the right thing. And doing the right thing, many times you might think you were doing the right thing, but, the way things happen, and it can always have a different meaning for someone. Well, right now, let's go to Tonga, where aid is finally arriving.
Tonga is far from the tropical paradise it once was. Across the island nation, homes have been flattened, trees uprooted, and everything is covered in a thick layer of volcanic ash.
What we are concerned now is clean drinking water, because most of our drinking water has been affected by the dust due from the aftermath of the volcanic ash.
The United Nations says more than 80% of Tonga's population has been impacted by Saturday's volcanic eruption.
Ash is everywhere and it's actually causing an issue with air pollution. We are really hoping that the rain will come to wash these ashes away.
Despite it all, there are signs the Pacific Island is slowly getting back on its feet. Tonga's airport runway has now been cleared of ash, making it safe for Australian Air Force planes to deliver desperately needed aid. After taking off from Amberley Air Base in Queensland, an RAAF Globemaster has now touched down in Tonga, delivering clean water, PPE for cleaning ash and shelter supplies. And more help is on the way. Final supplies from the Australian Defence Force and UNICEF Australia were loaded onto HMAS Adelaide today.
We're able to supply 44 pallets of emergency response materials, and that includes water and sanitation and hygiene kits.
The ship is expected to arrive in Tonga next week.
We've got soldiers, sailors and airmen that are extremely proud to be working with our Pacific family.
Communication with Tonga has been a major challenge over the last few days, particularly for the Tongan diaspora desperately waiting for news of their loved ones back home. There's been relief for some families, though, after one network in Tonga temporarily restored its connection last night. For Tongan Australian Olivia Fanupo, that restored connection allowed a desperate phone reunion to take place. She was finally able to get in touch with her parents-in-law in the disaster zone.
We're both relieved to hear that they were both doing fine, and that's the main thing. As long as they could answer the phone and say hello, we were happy with that.
Sweet relief after so much uncertainty. Lydia Feng, ABC.
And of course, there is a relief, and we've been talking to a few of the people we know. As you saw them on the TV the other day, they're running a small broadcast similar to what I'm doing, but from their home based in Redcliffe. And Lavali, who was with us in Radio 4EB, and he was with the Department of Foreign Affairs before. So yeah, him and his family and the other groups from the Pacifica group are doing a wonderful job trying to connect with home. Of course, there will be some charities and some other fundraising activities that will happen. So, please stay tuned on that story as well. Well, right now, the other news that everyone's working about is, once again, another state is going to do its own thing and rechange the rules on the borders, and the border opening date has been changed.
Well, after an extraordinary late-night press conference, Western Australia's reopening plan has been turned upside down. The state has abandoned its plans to reopen to the rest of the country and the world from February 5. Mark McGowan in a late-night press conference saying that it was no longer safe or reasonable or responsible for WA to go ahead with that plan because of the Omicron variant, describing it as a game changer that he said meant that the previous assumptions that WA had based its decision on to reopen, that they were no longer applicable and that he had no choice but to act.
It would be irresponsible and reckless for the state government to ignore the facts and ignore the reality of the situation playing out on the East Coast. It's expected they'll be reaching their peak of this current wave in coming weeks. At that point, after the peak, I hope we can have a better understanding of Omicron and what it means for Western Australia.
Now, while the February 5 date is gone, a new date has not been set, so West Australians once again completely unclear when borders will reopen. Mr McGowan acknowledged that the situation would cause significant heartbreak and distress for a lot of people, saying he apologised for that, but insisting that the situation left him with no choice. Now, of course, WA was significantly the last state in the country to reopen. Every other state began to relax and relax its borders and allow visitors back in late in 2021. WA decided to wait a bit longer until vaccination rates reached 90%. That threshold is just around the corner for WA, but Mr McGowan now says that's not enough, that much greater third dose coverage is needed before he would be comfortable to reopen. Now, the plan to reopen had strongly divided opinion here in Western Australia. There were some people who were very happy not to be seeing the scenes we're seeing over east of very busy hospitals, very long testing lines and extremely high case numbers. On the flip side, there were many people who hadn't seen family or friends in 2 years plus who were desperate for those borders to reopen. So certainly a decision that will strongly divide opinion here in Western Australia, particularly so close to when borders were supposed to reopen. It was barely 2 weeks away. Airlines had put on considerable numbers of extra flights. There were many bookings for people desperate to get into WA. Those hopes are now in tatters. A decision Mr McGowan says, though, is one that has to be made.
I know this decision will be unpopular with many people, as holiday plans and some family gatherings will have been disrupted. For that, I am sorry. I understand exactly what this means for many people who are hoping to reunite without any restrictions. But from February 5, there are enhanced compassionate exemptions. If we proceeded with the original plan, we would be deliberately seeding thousands upon thousands of COVID cases into WA at this point in time. That is not what I'm going to do, especially when the science says we need to boost third doses and so many young children still need to get their vaccine. It would be reckless and irresponsible to open up now. I can't do it. I understand that many people have planned around this date, and it is important we now provide people with a pathway to reconnect with families on compassionate grounds in a safe manner. WA will be taking on more risk as many people enter under compassionate grounds from February 5. But also we know the let it rip strategy with low third dose vaccine levels doesn't work. The proof is on our television screens every evening. We have an opportunity to do better, and that's what we will strive to do. What will remain unchanged for now is our robust testing, tracing, isolation and quarantine regime. This will stay. It has served the state well. We may well have to go without this regime when there is widespread community transmission, but we are not at that point now. Next week, we will convene another State Disaster Council meeting. We will look to finalise the remainder of the public health rules and settings that will be required for when we have high caseloads of Omicron or when border controls are eased at some point in time in the future.
Well, after an extraordinary late-night press conference, Western Australia's reopening plan has been turned upside down. The state has abandoned its plans to reopen.
Sorry about that. Yes, so, sometime in the future, as you mentioned, at this point in time, no date has been set forward, so, we won't know that. So right now, time to take a look at the economic outlook, and with that, let's welcome Joyce Frydenbeck, our Treasurer.
Treasurer, today's job numbers are really pretty stunning, but they do predate Omicron. This week we've already seen also the worst January consumer confidence figures since 1992, and we've just heard in the package that businesses are talking about the current period as a shadow lockdown. Why should we be optimistic that the economy will snap out of the Omicron shock quickly?
Well, the fundamentals, Laura, of the Australian economy remain sound, and as you say, it was quite a remarkable set of job numbers today. The unemployment rate at 4.2%, the lowest in more than 13 years, and in fact the fourth lowest unemployment rate since that ABS series on a monthly basis began back in 1978. What was particularly pleasing about today's numbers is that of the 65,000 new jobs created, more than half went to young people, and 2/3 of those 65,000 jobs were full-time. But I understand that the economy is still in the middle of the pandemic, and it's very challenging, with real pressure on our hospital system, real pressure on our supply chains. But overall, the economy remains sound. We've seen from Commonwealth Bank real-time data that consumer spending is down just 3% early in the year. We've seen from Westpac them say that the consumer sentiment remains in positive territory. And the National Australia Bank has said that the impact on the economy is not as bad as been reported or indeed feared, with their spending levels still above pre-pandemic. That's not to say there are not sectors across the economy that are doing it very tough right now, and that's why we have a series of measures to support them.
Well, rather than simply asserting or hoping that everything will be great, shouldn't you be taking out more insurance to ensure that it is great? Why not consider some more short-term measures in the interests of boosting economic confidence?
Well, for example, with small businesses that do it tough, we have a loss carry back measure which allows them, if they're making losses, to go to the ATO to get a cash refund against taxes that they've previously paid. We've also got a small and medium-sized business loan guarantee scheme which can see loans of up to $5 million. The states are also putting in place in New South Wales and Victoria relief for commercial tenants due to Omicron. And as we've seen in recent days, billions and billions of dollars making its way into the economy through tax cuts, which will help buffer the economic shock, because we know that both businesses and households, Laura, have combined stored up $360 billion on their balance sheets that was not there at the start of the pandemic. This money, once health restrictions start to ease, will be spent and will support the recovery.
You've said repeatedly this week that the state of the workforce is the central issue for you, and the government keeps easing the health restrictions to improve that, but that doesn't really help if people can't access rapid antigen tests they need to get back into the workforce. As the person responsible for the country's economic management, don't you have a responsibility to facilitate the widespread availability of these tests?
Well, there's lots in that question. Firstly, reducing the isolation requirements has been very important in helping to alleviate some of that pressure. I was recently at a Coles distribution centre in Laverton where they said it was already making a real difference. I was at a trucking business in Bayswater as well where it was making a difference to supply chains. The work the Prime Minister is doing with the states on a plan to open up our schools on term one is going to be really important as well with respect to the workforce, as well as the booster shots and the vaccines for young people, as well as the changes around migration settings for those who are coming into the country and their working requirements. But with respect to RAT tests, there are two key issues. One is supply, the other is access. With respect to supply, we've got more than 200 million on order. In the last 2 weeks, 7 million RAT tests have come into Victoria. We've provided more than 6 million to the aged care sector, and we're providing 10 million to the states to be available in those clinics. With respect to access, and this was reaffirmed today, Laura, at National Cabinet, those RAT tests are free if they're provided through a state clinic for someone who is either a close contact or someone who's symptomatic, but they're not endorsed by the medical professionals as some sort of universal screening tool to be used right across the economy.
But Treasurer, have you considered the idea of providing them free? Have you estimated the cost of what that might be? I mean, it's going to be an issue for some time to come. Surely the cost is worth it.
Well, we are providing those free of charge to concessional card holders, more than 6 million. That's an equity issue, and that we're doing in partnership 50-50 with the states. But if you are symptomatic, if you are a designated close contact, you can go to a state clinic and get either a PCR test or a RAT test there and then and get the results very soon after, as well as providing the RAT test we are at a national level through aged care, which is a more vulnerable setting. With respect to the broader provision of RAT tests across the economy, it's not the medical advice that it's a universal screening tool, and I think that's really important to underscore.
Yesterday you outlined plans to try to get backpackers and international students back in to help ease shortages in the economy. Were you at all ashamed to be asking them to come and help us when we unceremoniously left thousands of them stranded here at the beginning of the pandemic without any form of assistance and relying on charity to be fed?
Well, look, there's a whole series of different challenges that we face now than compared to at the start of the pandemic. With respect to backpackers and with respect to international students, there are some 175,000 who have received their visa approval but have not yet made their way to Australia. So what we're doing is ensuring that they get rebated on those particular charges, and that will be, a good...
And that was the news that we featured yesterday, that, if you are a student or the working visa the applicant, and if you travel now, that your visa application fee will be waived. Of course, as the Treasurer said, that the challenges were different in the very beginning to what it is now, and they have to micromanage as it happens along the way as well. Right now, of course, we know, talking about the backbone of the country, small businesses. Small businesses all doing it tough, extremely tough, because many times and many occasions we can see that if it wasn't for the direct input of the owners, or if they did not spend a lot of time in the businesses themselves, they would just not survive.
In the picturesque New South Wales Blue Mountains, Anthea Hammond is in the midst of what she calls a perfect storm. Her business, Scenic World, was already grappling with a skills shortage and a wet summer. And then came Omicron, wrecking the tourist attractions' peak period.
We have had more than 22% of our staff test positive or need to isolate as close contacts. And then in addition to those that actually have it, we have a whole nother set that are sick and go home and can't get a rat, and they can't come back to work until they've tested negative, which has pushed us up to about 35% absenteeism for our staff. So it's been an incredible challenge to even keep our business open.
When 7:30 last spoke with Anthea in May, she was hopeful the reopening of Australia would help the business bounce back. But now she says the company is enduring a shadow lockdown and struggling to retain about 150 staff.
Coming into December, we were really optimistic that we were going to have a great summer holidays, and unfortunately that just hasn't quite been the case. This is our 5th school holidays in a row that we have had our visitation impacted, and so many operators that I've spoken to said, we need January. And we have now lost that. So this isn't only about the 2 weeks or 3 weeks that Omicron is impacting us. This is about the last 18 months and about having an industry at the end of this period that is here ready to welcome people back when we actually get out the other side.
Of course, a key difference for businesses now compared to last year and 2020 is the level of support, and there are many like Anthea who say free rapid antigen tests, or RATs, and more assistance from state and federal governments are required to help the tourism, hospitality and entertainment sectors ride out this wave.
Anything which consumers seem to see as optional, involves human contact, involves moving over distances, they're clearly voting with their feet, or in this case not, and choosing not to do it. This pandemic, and this latest episode is no exception, is really an issue that hits at sectors, stratas of society, particular geographies. It's no surprise to me that some parts of those are asking for some help.
There's been moments of thinking, well, if I don't have any chefs, I can't open. But we've come back.
Smaller businesses arguably have it harder than most. Claire Robertson reopened her cafe in the Yarra Valley outside Melbourne today after another COVID-induced closure. Due to supply chain shortages of some food, staff infections and a drop in customers, she says navigating the uncertainty now is more complicated than the long months of lockdown last year.
Every time we went back into lockdown, the JobKeeper started again. I didn't have to do anything, so I knew my staff were taken care of. And now we reopened and then closed within a couple of days. My expenses were through the roof, and my wages, every time we reopen, it's costly.
Of course, sparse supermarket shelves, worker shortages and a lack of rapid tests were not part of the national reopening plan. Nor was the possibility that authorities in a country like the United States would advise its citizens against travelling here. The government's critics say the health of the economy has been put above the health of the nation. But the Prime Minister's supporters argue Omicron has been a game changer, and that as more workers get it and then recover, staffing levels will become more reliable. For For example, the recently infected Deputy PM is now back on the road.
It's not good that you get it, but it actually helps with the immunity if you had it. And so all the time we're getting ourselves into a stronger position, some of it by default, some of it by planning.
This is all a mess, and it is a mess at the hands of a hopeless government being led by an incompetent Prime Minister.
In an effort to iron out problems in supply chains, several ideas have been discussed, including further cutting isolation periods for infectious people from 7 to 5 days, and possibly even allowing under 18s to drive forklifts.
Well, I can't believe I'm even having to say this, but children should not drive forklifts. It is dangerous. The fact that this idea is even in the Prime Minister's head is extremely concerning.
Both the forklift proposal, which the PM staff say came from an industry group, and the shorter isolation period were rejected at National Cabinet today. But licensing regulations for truck drivers will be reviewed.
It's all about getting the right balance between getting people back to work and not over-stressing your hospital system, which is of course under a lot of stress.
It's not true to say that no one could understand how bad Omicron would be. Last year we were telling the government, as were businesses and a lot of experts, that they needed RATS tests, even with Delta.
Mid-last year, businessman and GWS Giants chairman Tony Shepherd was among those urging governments to consider the importance of RAT tests to get Australia reopened.
Look, yeah, it's a bit disappointing. Now, there have been slip-ups and there has been things overlooked. That's inevitable in a crisis like this, which is a once-in-a-lifetime event. But I think the recovery's been pretty good.
As a federal election approaches, ministers are going to talk at length about the relative strength of the nation's economy, which has been supported by huge levels of government spending and very low interest rates. Data out today showed the unemployment rate dropped to 4.2% in December, its lowest level in more than 13 years. The result, however, comes with a caveat. It doesn't capture the full effect of Omicron. But some economists are optimistic the impact could be relatively short-lived.
And we do hope that it is short-lived because, the way that it is being done, of course, the battle of the federal and the state politics also comes into play there as well. Well, right now it's time to go to our Daily India report.
Welcome to the Daily India report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, ahead of the state assembly elections in the largest state of India, Uttar Pradesh, a blow to the Samajwadi Party as the daughter-in-law of its top leader joined the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party. In a major blow to Akhilesh Yadav-led Samajwadi Party, his father and former Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Mulayam Singh Yadav's daughter-in-law Aparna Yadav on January 19th joined Bharatiya Janata Party ahead of the upcoming 2022 Uttar Pradesh Assembly election. The development comes days after BJP saw back-to-back exits of ministers and party MLAs. Former UP ministers from Yogi Adityanath's cabinet, Dara Singh Chauhan and Swami Prasad Maurya, joined Akhilesh Yadav ahead of the high-octane battle. Aparna Yadav joined BJP in presence of Uttar Pradesh Deputy Chief Minister Keshav Prasad Maurya and BJP State President Swatantra Dev Singh. At the event, Aparna Yadav said she has always been impressed with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and added that the nation's interest has always been her priority. Aparna Yadav said, quote, "I am very thankful to BJP. The nation always comes first for me. I admire PM Modi's work," end quote. Assembly polls in Uttar Pradesh will be held in 7 phases beginning from February 10th. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with his Mauritius counterpart Pravind Jugnauth, virtually inaugurated India-assisted infrastructure projects in the island nation. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Mauritian counterpart Pravind Kumar Jugnauth virtually inaugurated India-assisted infrastructure projects in the island country. Both the leaders jointly launched the Social Housing Unit, Civil Service College and 8-megawatt solar PV farm projects in Mauritius. The meeting included extending the agreement on the $190 million line of credit from India to Mauritius for the Metro Express project and other infrastructure projects. A memorandum of understanding on implementation of small development projects was exchanged during the virtual conference scheduled for January 20th, the MEA informed. The relationship between India and Mauritius has taken new strides since March 2017 after an agreement was signed between RITES and India Public Sector Undertaking, and the government of Mauritius appointing RTES as a consultant for the Metro Express project. India has extended service LOCs for Mauritius to assist development programs, human resources and skill upgrades. Some notable India-assisted projects in Mauritius include Mahatma Gandhi Institute, Upadhyay Training Centre and Jawaharlal Nehru Hospital. The virtual Global Youth Conference marking Pravasi Bharatiya Divas 2022 focused on the theme Role of Diaspora Youth in AKAM Innovation and New Technologies. Here's a special presentation by a key panelist, Kundan Joshi, founder and CEO, The App Lab.
We have more than 70 investments in various startups in Canada and US through our accelerator, the Startup Lab, and a lot more to come there. We have helped more than 500 startups through one of our incubated startup called Eco, which is a startup community platform. And we are really vested in building the next breed of entrepreneurs in Canada and in North America as a whole, and soon globally. The future of innovation lies in fostering technology towards creating impact organizations. Impact organizations that can balance the triple bottom line, people, planet, profit. And the mindset of the youth, as you saw in the previous slides, is really set to take on this responsibility, in my opinion, as well as the next generation of family office are becoming the catalyst to investments in tech and impact social enterprises. I'm actually currently creating an organization in Canada to bring together the next generation of family offices from the diaspora to make investments, so to make similar investments.
India extends international passenger flight ban till 28th February amid the COVID Omicron surge. Scheduled international commercial flights to and from India will remain suspended till February 28th. Director General of Civil Aviation said in a fresh order on January 19. Flights under air bubble arrangements and Vande Bharat flights would remain unaffected. All such flights would continue to operate as per the ongoing arrangements. Cargo flights would also be exempt from the extended ban. The DGCA said the decision comes as the world is braving a fresh wave of COVID-19 pandemic driven by Omicron, the latest variant of the SARS-CoV-2. In November 2021, the Modi government had decided to resume scheduled international flight operations. The emergence of Omicron threw a spanner in the plan and the government withdrew the decision to resume scheduled international flights days before January 15th. Scheduled international flights have been suspended in India from March 23, 2020, 2 days before the nationwide lockdown was imposed in the country. The suspension was extended every month, allowing emergency international travel under the air bubble agreements. India has air transport bubbles with Afghanistan, Australia, Bahrain, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Canada, Ethiopia, Finland, France, Germany, Iraq, Japan, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Kuwait and Maldives, Mauritius, Nepal, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Oman, Qatar, Russia, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, Seychelles, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Switzerland, Tanzania, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, US and Uzbekistan. The agreements allow both-way air travel under some terms and conditions. The USA and India continue to build on bilateral dialogue and strategic relations. US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman spoke with Indian Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla on a range of global and bilateral issues. US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman spoke to Indian Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla on January 19th on a range of global and bilateral issues. In a tweet, Indian External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said that Shringla had a wide-ranging telecon with Sherman. They reviewed, among other issues, upcoming bilateral engagements in the COVID pandemic, including supply of vaccines, and exchanged views on Indo-Pacific, Middle East, UNSC, India's neighborhood, etc. The conversation between Sherman, who has been a key figure in talks with Russia and met her Russian counterparts in Geneva and Brussels last week, and Shringla comes a day after the White House warned that Russia could launch an attack on Ukraine at any point. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Kyiv, where he reassured Ukraine of US support and is scheduled to travel to Germany to discuss a unified response to Russia's action with European allies and partners. He is also meeting his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov last week in Geneva to find common ground. The US has maintained that Russia de-escalation along Ukraine's borders must be the first step to defusing the crisis, while Russia has sought border guarantees on European security, including a commitment to limit NATO's expansion and membership. For India, which enjoys a close strategic partnership with both US and Russia, the renewed tension between the two countries has been a matter of concern. This is particularly important at a time when New Delhi is hoping that the Joe Biden administration would waive off sanctions that would otherwise apply to India under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act for his acquisition of S-400 missile systems from Russia. India's most successful female tennis player Sania Mirza will retire after the 2022 tennis season. Indian tennis superstar Sania Mirza will retire from the sport after the conclusion of the 2022 season. India's most successful female tennis player Sania shared her retirement plans after the former world number 1 and her doubles partner Nadia Kichenok suffered an early exit from the 2022 edition of the Australian Open. The 35-year-old had become the first Indian to clinch a Women's Tennis Association singles title in 2005. Sania had scripted history in the WTA singles event at Hyderabad. The tennis icon is married to former Pakistan captain Shoaib Malik. The 35-year-old last won a women's doubles title at the Ostrava Open in September. Sania won 6 Grand Slam titles in her glittering tennis career. Often dubbed as the greatest Indian women's tennis player in the history of the sport, Sania shared the retirement announcement during a press conference. Speaking at a presser after her defeat in the Australian Open women's doubles first round, Sania confirmed that the tennis ace will hang up her racket at the end of the 2022 season. Sania and her doubles partner Nadia Kichenok were upstaged by Slovenia's Tamara Zidensek and Kaza Juvan in the first round of Australian Open. Sania will next compete in the mixed doubles with Rajiv Ram. After impressing fans with 5 seasons of the popular show Nagin, TV producer Ekta Kapoor is back again with yet another season.
वर्ष 2020 अब तक इस संसार में सब सामान्य चल रहा है, पर वर्ष 2020 एक महामारी पूरी दुनिया को जकड़ने की बदल रही है दुनिया, बदल चुकी है नागिन.
Bollywood's super-duper producer Ekta Kapoor is back again with her popular show Nagin. Ekta shared the promo teaser of the supernatural fantasy thriller series Nagin 6 and it seems to be grander than ever. Apart from the video, the makers have also finally revealed the storyline of this season. However, fans are excited to know who will be seen playing the titular role this time. While sharing the video, the official Instagram page of Colors TV wrote, देश की रक्षा करने के लिए जहर बनकर जहर को ही खत्म करने आ रही है नागिन. फिर एक बार #Nagin6 जल्द ही #Colors पर @Woot. From the promo, it seems like Nagin has turned as the savior to save the world from the attack of the dangerous virus. Earlier, certain names from the TV industry, including Moni Roy, Arjun Bijlani, Surbhi Chanda, Sharad Malhotra, Nia Sharma, Karanveer Bohra, Surbhi Jyoti, among others, have enjoyed massive fan following after their portrayal in the show. With the new season, fans are scratching their heads to find out the new lead.
पड़ोसी देश एक वायरस को हथियार बनाकर हर तरफ महामारी फैला देगा. कौन करेगा इससे हमारी रक्षा?
जहर ही जहर को काट सकता है.
That's all for this bulletin of Daily India Report.
Thank you very much for that report, Himanshu. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, the Daily India Report is a PIO TV presentation exclusive to Australian Indian Radio, and we'd like to thank the Gupta family, Kayan Gupta ji, Manish Gupta, Himanshu, and the team from Delhi presenting that Daily India Report on a daily basis. Also not forgetting Anil. So all of them working very hard to make sure that we have the Daily India Report sent to us daily from the Delhi. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful having your company. Until tomorrow is goodbye from me. And the weather now is a little bit sunny now. It doesn't look that bad out there, 25 degrees and cloudy, so not as warm as it has been in the past few days. And how did you enjoy that rain? Yeah, there was some rain that came down and really bucketed here in the night, but it's all clear now. And of course, what happens after the rain is, the environment looks very clean. And from where we sit, out here from the windows on both sides of the studio, we can see beautiful Brisbane to all the way to Story Bridge and past all the way to the Gateway Bridge as well. So ladies and gentlemen, until tomorrow, it's goodbye from me. Wonderful to have your company. Thank you so much for joining in.